What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Cycle 365. This is our mini-series on youth sports, our summer mini-series. And this is episode 5. We're going to be doing Burnout in youth sports. And with me, I got somebody who's a familiar voice, a familiar face, I guess you could say as well. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, you've heard me before. It's Kodey Stoffer from the Cycle 365, and Simon asked me to join him on this mini episode, so I'm going to take what I've learned from my coaching youth sport and athletes class, as well as sports psychology classes and stuff like that, to try and bring a bit more of a, I guess, scholastic view on burnout and such like that. So,
yes. Also, he was a youth sport athlete, so he has that experience as well. As
that is true.
to a degree. Yeah. So I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Simon Voyanos. Y'all should probably know that by now, but it is what it is. So yeah, we're going to do Burnout in youth sports. This is a pretty, I wouldn't say super controversial, at least not as controversial as some of our past ones, like discrimination, privilege. Check those out. But this is one that's pretty common, and honestly, it spans over everyone. You know, it could happen to anybody. It happened to me, you know, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And Kodey, just so you know, I don't know if you've listened to some of the other miniseries episodes, but for the sake of this miniseries, we're like classifying youth sports as basically just sports 18 and below, which is pretty broad. So, yeah.
Yeah, I usually consider from like little kids to high school is usually where I say youth sports ends. That's even like by definition kind of where youth sports ends too.
Yeah, for sure. All right, okay, sounds good. So let's get into it. Since you're the one who took the class, why don't you go ahead and define what burnouts are and how are they caused?
Well, I appreciate that intro, seeing that I got my notes up here too, because they were open note tests anyway, so no point in mislabeling it. But burnout, by youth sport definition, is a negative psychological and physical state in which an individual feels tired and they're less able to perform well and become less interested in the activity. And there's a couple of things that go into burnout. Some factors include overload. So that includes overtraining. That includes kids or youth athletes being overstressed about events. So if they're thinking about it too much, or that also can include staleness. So, you know, just getting bored of the sport can cause overload, especially if you're doing it. I mean, I feel like a lot of youth sports are 5 to 6 days a week anyway, at least in my experience. And then there's also like what we call social climate factors. So that'd be your parents, that'd be bad coaching, that'd be like a lack of personal control, because a huge motivator for youth sport athletes is to try and obtain autonomy. And so if they're not in control of their youth sport experience to the degree that they enjoy it, then they're more likely to burn out. And then also just like, obviously everyone's different, you know? So like personality has a huge part to play in it. Some people just they're not sports kids, you know? And that's okay. But those kids, because of their families or, you know, because of their friends, they end up kind of forced into sports and then they get stuck. So there's a whole bunch of factors that go into burnout. And yeah, that's kind of the X's and O's of burnout exactly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's all pretty much right. Like I said, burnout's a pretty like broad topic, I would say, you know, because there's a lot of ways that a kid could get burnt out. Personally, in my opinion, like I got burnt out, you know, and there are a lot of reasons behind that, which I'll go ahead and get into. So I guess the first time, I don't know about you, Kodey, but the first time I felt like, should I say this, like a sense of burnout, like a sense of just being, honestly, just feeling like I'm done with the sport, like I don't want to do it anymore, was probably back in Texas. I haven't really talked about how intense, you know, Texas football programs were. And honestly, I really only went through, maybe not only, but I went through most of the middle school circuit, which is in itself pretty tough. And so for those of you who don't know or didn't check out the second miniseries episode, I did say I'm from Plano, Texas, a little suburb right above Dallas, Texas. And Plano has always been one of the, I should say, how should I say? It's always been one of the historical football powerhouses in Texas. Like they have around like 6 or 7 state championships. That's honestly, like in the 1900s, that's almost a state championship every decade, which is pretty great, consistency wise, which is insane. They've always made the playoffs, and they have all this funding. They've been sponsored by Nike for a really long time, and there's a reason behind that, because they're one of the powerhouses. Now, not like in Allen, Texas, which is where Heisman winner and Arizona Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray is from, because they're even more insane. Their tradition is more recent and not as historical. But in Plano, like there's a real tough tradition that honestly, I don't want to get too negative, but I'll keep it real. Like it's a tradition that you're not gonna break as an athlete. Like coaches themselves who are hired by Plano are not gonna break. Because this is just how it is. It's been like this for over 100 years. We've had state championships. We have the rings to show off for the success. We have the NFL players to show off for our success, and we have the equipment and the money to show off for our success. So that's why this is the way the program is. But I remember middle school to start. We would start. Oh my gosh, we would start at least the 7th grade. Usually most kids would in 7th grade. There was no 6th grade football. You usually played for your local sports league, which is like there are a million in Texas, so that was easy. But once you get to the 7th grade, starting that first week of August, weeks before school starts, you start hitting training and like after school programs. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, like it's voluntary, but also it's not, you know what I mean? Like you should go, but if you don't, that's going to affect your playing time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we had the same thing, but that was at the high school level, like,
yeah,
like here in Colorado, at least in my experience in Arapahoe County and Centennial, we had the leagues, like what you were talking about for 6th grade. We had that for 6th through 8.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, okay, well, I guess I kind of already knew that. I just thought maybe it was done through the school district, because our leagues, I mean, I can't even say that. I was about to say that our football leagues were done through the school district, but we would schedule at least 2 or 3 out of district games. One of those games I did play Kyler Murray, and another, I wouldn't say NFL player I played against, but I knew there was an NFL player there, and that was Jamal Adams. He went to Hebron High School back in the day in Louisville. So he was there. And so we would have games like that, and then in-district games against other middle schools. And there are 13 middle schools in our school district. So it was pretty structured, I'd say, and it was intense. And like, those off-season, I can't even say off-season, those preseason workouts were like tough. They were basically a normal, like, practice, 2 or 3 hours. And that's even before we got to compete. So you had basically 2 or 3 weeks of just straight conditioning, almost no football. We just running. We got sleds, and that's it. And in Texas in August, that's over 100-degree weather pretty much every day. And they do that on purpose so they could weed out the not in my words, but in their words, the mentally weak ones. So it sucked. And that started in middle school, bro. And that's not even before we get into the actual season, where we had a whole period in place of PE just to practice. So we would have practices from 2:30 to 5:30 every day, except for game day, obviously, and then except for the day after, we would only go from 2:30 to 4:30, and then that's how it was. And then sometimes during the season, I mean, well, not sometimes, a lot of the time, and this was kind of my own fault, there would be early morning workouts. So the coach would open the gym up at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. And then we'd all get in there, we'd work out before school. After that, do our thing at school, then go to practice. So that was happening during the season. And then once that ended, basically off-season programs were insane, and were even more intense, I would say, because it wasn't just football anymore. It was just straight workouts, and everything was football related. And so football in Texas was literally almost year round at that point. And I didn't even cover the off-season programs, which, by the way, they had at the high schools so that they could pack as many little middle schoolers in there as possible to get ready. And so, honestly, with all of that, that's pretty close. I'm not gonna lie. I probably was doing something football related more than 3 hours a day for almost if I had to estimate, probably around 330 days at least a school year, and that was 7th grade and 8th grade. So I mean, I don't know if that sounds a lot to you, Kodey, but for a middle schooler, that's a lot of work. And like, forget like other sports. Like, you could play other sports and there's similar commitments, but this was the base level for me, you know?
I was about to say that's definitely really different from my youth sport experience, because I never experienced burnout symptoms, I don't want to say, until I got to the high school level. Like, yeah. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with coaching too. Like we worked hard. Like we used to do this conditioning in middle school called winner circle, where the last half an hour of practice, like Monday through Thursday, was just straight up conditioning. And like we used to run hills for every point or score that we allowed. So like we worked hard during the season. And then like, I know that states have a lot of say as far as like the structure of youth sports and even like high school sports, especially. You've probably heard of CHASA, Simon, you know?
Yeah.
They have a lot of rules on when you can meet up and how long you can meet for, et cetera, right? And I'd imagine that trickled down to like the league level, because we would do 7-on-7s in the spring. And then we do like a football camp sometime in June/July that like the coaches themselves ran for like the whole league basically, or like any other team that wanted to join in. And then it was just football. So definitely not 330 days a year. Like, you know, I'd be on my off season grind, like jumping rope and stuff like that, but not like weights or anything like that. Like that wasn't asked or expected of us at the middle school level. And part of that, I think, is because it was a league, but I'd say it was a bit more developmentally appropriate. Shout out to Dr. Stalino on that one.
No, yeah, I would agree that the way Colorado handles it is pretty much, I would say it's more developmentally appropriate. But at the same time, I mean, like, this isn't shade or anything. Like, I'm just trying to be realistic here. But like, Texas does this so they could prepare their kids for high school football. So it's not something. So there's no adjustment period once they get in. So that realistically, every player that comes through as a freshman could play on varsity right away if needed. So that kind of just like that's how it was explained to me. So that kind of just raises the potential cap. Which, yeah, like, I don't know. I'm not gonna lie, like, it's tough, you know, like, because it wasn't like we had practice every other day. Like, middle school, I coached up in Greeley, like, they only had practices maybe 2 or 3 times a week, you know, which was kind of weird to me. We had practice every day. That's not even including, you know, our personal workouts that we did on the side as well, either with the school or outside of the school. So yeah, and so you mentioned 7-on-7, and we did 7-on-7 as well during the spring. So when we weren't working out or doing anything like that, we were doing that, or we were studying playbooks and whatnot. And this is just a general thing, but all the middle schools, all 13, well, okay, not all 13, sorry, all 4-ish middle schools or high school, because each middle school was like designated for a high school, and you can't transfer out of that or you'd be penalized. I know in Colorado you could basically transfer wherever almost, but in Texas it was much stricter. But basically, you know, high school was designated for middle schools at least, or for middle schools, and so those schools would all have the same playbook that the high schools ran. That way that everyone already knew the playbooks coming in. Sometimes some coaches would use fragments of the whole playbook rather than the whole one, just because it's easier for a middle schooler to understand. But for the most part, it was the same plays, just different names, you know, maybe different audibles, but it really was the same thing. So honestly, doing that year round was like tough, because it got to the point where like I knew the rewards that I would get if I made it onto a high school squad, got to play varsity, because it was pretty well known, at least in Plano, which is a bigger school, like I said, more of a perennial powerhouse type of school. If you made varsity as a as an underclassman at all, or if you made varsity and started for more than 2 years, or at least 2 years, you're almost guaranteed to get a football scholarship somewhere. And it doesn't matter where, like whether it's D1 or D2 or D3, like you're going to get a scholarship somewhere if you start for the Plano Wildcats or play for the Plano Wildcats. That's just how it is. And that was something that was normal. Honestly, that's something that was normal. Like they'd consistently send like 10 to 15 dudes to colleges every year. And that was normal. And so I knew that if I could just get onto the high school squad, then eventually play, then basically I have a scholarship waiting for me. I have free education waiting for me. And I got all the perks of college waiting for me. And as someone who was an immigrant, a first generation American, and hasn't had family members that went to college, that meant everything to me, which was honestly the only thing that really drove me. And I reached certain points of like burnout, if I'm just being honest. And that was like looking way into the future. So I can't even imagine like playing for not a worse program, but a smaller program where those odds aren't as great and just like trying to grind it out, because that I would hate that, honestly.
So from what I'm hearing, the beginning of your experience had a lot to do with probably overtraining, with working basically around 330 days a year, and even overstressing, because looking into the future and feeling like, this is my chance, this is my best shot, is to try and get a scholarship through football, obviously puts a lot more pressure, especially on, you're talking 7th and 8th grade. Like that's a lot of weight for a child to be carrying.
Yeah, no, it is. And like, if I'm just being honest, like the culture of my football team, my teammates and my coaching staff was super supportive. Everyone supported each other. Everyone respected the grind. Everyone was putting in their work. There was nobody that was like noticeably like slacking or like wasn't taking it as seriously. And if there were, then they were considered clowns and considered outcasts. Like it was abnormal for somebody to not care this much about football and to not know the stakes. Because honestly, if you didn't care that much, as far as we were concerned, you weren't part of the squad because you weren't one of us. So like it took me, wasn't like community around me at all that like burnt me out. It was just the regimen of it all, because if anything, I loved my teammates, I love my coaches, and I love my community. It was great. Like it was great knowing that like, hey, I lived right across the street from this huge football stadium, which is twice as big as UNC's stadium. It could hold almost, oh my gosh, it was over 15,000 for sure. Press boxes were nice. Every Friday night, I could hear the band. I could hear the crowd. Like, it was crazy. And it was great to know that, like, yo, I have the opportunity to be a part of a fantastic culture, a fantastic tradition that hundreds and thousands of football players in the years before me have done. So me and to everyone else, it was an honor. Don't get it twisted. The hard work was definitely a burden. And there are times where I was pulling like a sled with like 150 pounds on it, and it'd be like chains around you in 100-degree weather and be like, dang, bro, like I could be chilling right now, or I could be at the pool with my girl right now. But instead I'm pulling a sled 100 of whole football field,
Would you call, because you said, if some people were on the team but not about the grind, then they weren't your teammates or whatever. But with as much pressure as there was, would you say that might be a toxic environment to just be aiming for elitism, basically, at the athletic level?
Yeah, it could be viewed as a toxic environment for sure. I'm not gonna lie, like, if you were put in any other environment, or here, let me backtrack a little bit. If you were that kid who didn't care as much, you weren't going to play football for us. And I think that's just the culture that our coaches put in place as well. And I had 2 different head coaches in middle school, and they both had the same attitude towards it. Like, yo, look, like it was kind of weird because it was definitely like, yeah, we're the Carpenter Cowboys. Oops, name drop. But yeah, we're the Carpenter Cowboys. You play for the Cowboys, the team, the blue and white, but at the same time, you're putting in this work so you could provide and be the best for the Plano Wildcats, which is the ultimate goal. And so there's always kind of a bigger picture. And if you were somebody who didn't buy into that bigger picture, and I mean, look, like in the nicest way possible, or at least for me, you know, talking to other people in the nicest way possible, like it was like, well, what are you doing here? Like, go play an instrument, or go do art, or go game, or do something that you actually want to do. Go make some money, you know, because this is something that's not built for everyone. And they were pretty good at saying that, you know, like without being super toxic. So if I'm just being honest, if people weren't about the grind, then they just weren't on the team most of the time. Like, there's definitely I would say every season there are at least 15 to 25 kids who left because of that. And that's fine. We all respected them. We all still hung out with them. We just weren't on the squad.
Yeah, and we had some of that in middle school, but it wasn't. I'm not really sure exactly what the causes were, but I don't know. It was like kind of a big deal whenever a kid was stepping away. Like they would tell the entire team. And I don't know if that's just something that like maybe my coaches did or instilled, but they, like the players themselves would basically like announce their retirement as like middle schoolers, which is kind of insane to me thinking back on it now with like, you know, and that might have been the grind, that might have been the conditioning or whatever, but you know, it's just kind of crazy to think about thinking back on middle school. But what I do want to get to, unless you have more to say about middle school, is you say like that was the beginning of your burnout. What was the progression of your burnout, and where did it actually like kind of finish your youth sport career?
Yeah, so like I said, in middle school, like there are definitely symptoms of burnout, but because of the community, historical tradition we had, my boys, you know, from the hood and all that, our coaches, I never seriously considered like quitting. That was out of the question for me. Like, yeah, obviously there were great things, but in my mind, if I quit, I was letting down my hood. I was letting down my teammates. I was letting down the coaches, who's done a lot for me. And
was football still fun?
Yes, it was. Oh yeah, like, dude, like honestly, like there's nothing like putting in so much work and knowing that you're playing against other dudes who put in that same amount of work, maybe even more, and then beating them down, and like playing in huge stadiums and having a roaring crowd and having marching bands and having chants and pep rallies. Like, it was, football culture in Texas is insane. Like, it definitely, there's definitely a little bit of a Hollywood type of aspect to it, you know, because it definitely builds up middle schoolers a lot, or you know, just football players a lot, and it's insane. I would honestly say like the serious burnout symptoms started when I moved to Colorado. Because right off the bat, name drop, it doesn't matter, because none of them are there anymore. And Kodey, you've played against this high school too, so you know what they're about. I went to Doherty High School down in Colorado Springs. And yeah, Doherty is nothing and will probably never be anything compared to what Plano is right now. They don't have any state championships, which I thought was weird. The only Colorado Springs school that has a state championship in football, I think, might be Palmer, and that was like the 50s. They're far from that. So there is no such tradition like that at all. Here, one sec. In terms of the community, I've talked about the community. In terms of the community, like not just at Doherty, but Colorado Springs in general, it was not something, honestly, that I could relate to as a person of color and as the son of immigrants. And here's why. Because back in Texas, my squad was mostly Latinos, Mexicans, and like black dudes. And I was like the one Asian guy. Like, there were probably as many Asian dudes as there were white kids, which was what the exact number was, 2 to be exact. So there you go. So, but even then, like, I still had a lot culturally to relate to those kids, and going to basically an almost all white school like Doherty and seeing like how they run their stuff. And so, because they're, first off, they're not as serious. Second off, there's already that cultural, you know, what's the word?
difference.
Yeah, that cultural difference, a pretty significant one at that. That I just didn't like. The coaches there, I'm just being honest. There are coaches that never in their lives would understand what it's like to be the son of an immigrant, a person of color, and they're privileged to say the least. I know that for a fact. They're privileged, and I wasn't. I was underprivileged for sure. So all of those things kind of just in general made me feel like I was on my own as is. Then actually going and like working out with them, like there are kids who are met like I know, you know, in Texas, like teams aren't perfect and they're not. There are some kids who messed around, but it was abnormal for a team to be messing around for more than a day or two and for the coaches to not bring down the hammer. Because I could tell you there are weeks on end where, you know, the coaching staff at the new school I was at would basically let their kids do almost anything. They would know about some of these things and they wouldn't hold them accountable. And to me, it came off as laziness. It came off as, like I said, I'm trying to be as nice as possible, but you gotta be real. I'm being realistic with my experiences. It just came off as like they don't care about football and they don't care about competition. They don't care about like having pride in being a good person on and off the field like that. You know what I mean? And for me, it was just like, all right, well, I'm putting in everything I can as, you know, as a linebacker, safety, whatever. But the 10 other dudes on this team or on the starting lineup ain't putting in as much as I am. And it's obvious because I've given them almost months of chances. And they continue to make the same stupid mistakes in Texas our sixth graders would make that aren't even on a team. And they don't get punished for it. For me, that was already jarring enough because it was like, all right, well, I'm basically doing everything I can, but we still taking L's. We're not winning as cleanly as we should. And for me, for somebody who is kind of naturally a perfectionist too, like that just didn't resonate well with me because I basically just saw everyone else, or mostly everyone else. I won't say everyone, but mostly everyone else as lazy. And I like, why should I care about a sport if they weren't? You know, and that was my mindset as a freshman at the new school. Like these kids weren't taking it as serious, so why should I care about their team? Because it's not my team, but about their team, their culture, and their community. Because that's nothing that has helped me out at all ever, and that's still the fact today. You know, and so it was just, I don't know. It was just frustrating, you know, to say the least. We'd win a solid amount of games my freshman year, but it was frustrating to say the least. And, you know, there are coaches who, I'm not going to lie, like I definitely probably knew more than as a freshman, you know, because I've had, you know, my share of guys that I've had to plan for, like a Kyler Murray, like a Rex Burkhead and Eno Benjamin. Even just going down the list of guys that like I've talked to before as well and mentored, like, you know, a Justin Blaylock, a 10-year starter for the Atlanta Falcons as a guard, Charlie Pepper, a Super Bowl winner on the as a safety for the Green Bay Packers, Keenan Robinson, linebacker for the Giants and Redskins. So I've had that knowledge. It's frustrating to like feel like I was going to a school and a team and feeling like I downgraded almost 4 or 5 grade levels. It felt because I don't know, and like I wasn't trying to be pushy or anything, but there were definitely calls that I was like, wow, that's the stupid, like that does not make any sense to call a prevent defense on 3rd and 5. You know, for example, it doesn't make any sense to blitz when they've been known to catch us off guard with the screen like 5 or 6 straight times. You know, like it's stuff like that like just frustrated me. And, you know, there are coaches that definitely talked down to me, that definitely like said unnecessary things about me, like calling me an idiot, saying like, I'm not going to go as far as racial slurs, but saying other slurs that aren't appropriate at all concerning my intelligence, you know, in general. And, you know, like Kodey, you know me, like in general, I'm a pretty quiet guy, I would say. I would be a little bit more introverted. And as a new kid on a football team, I knew my place. So I wasn't saying a lot to start. They were the one initiating it. Like you know, there are times where like I've even had coaches like give me the wrong plays on purpose, and I know this because I would overhear their conversations walking by their offices, you know, and just so that, you know, they have an excuse to not play me, you know, as a varsity player or as a JV kid, and it was frustrating. And so all of that put together, along with my family situation, like my dad getting sick and having cancer, and just jobs being a tough thing, and financially like just not being in a good spot, it kind of just weighed on me. And like, I honestly, if I had a good community and if I had good coaches, like I wouldn't have quit. But definitely pushed me towards the edge multiple times, like at least 10 or 15 times in one season than I've ever felt as as a middle schooler. That was pretty harsh. I'm not gonna lie. I'm sorry, but I mean, I'm just keeping it real.
No, and you have to be honest with it and with the experience, because as cruddy as it is, Doherty High School isn't the only, school that's guilty of causing burnout. Like this is happening to people across the nation, and a lot of people don't know about it, and they don't know what they're doing either. Some coaches definitely do try and push kids off the team, but a lot of coaches just think that being mean and like just being like derogatory towards kids is the way to coach. And we've going through education, especially through coaching, like you find out that that's not the way to do it, and that other coaching factors climb into it. Now, that doesn't mean don't be stern, right? That doesn't mean don't correct players for mistakes that they make or don't point them out. But saying things like idiot, or, even sayings like pull your out of your butt, like pull your head out of your butt, like, but not with those words, because football is where I first like cursed. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, that's the first place I cursed, because my coach was like, yeah, you can curse, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. Like,
Really?
So football
Dang.
culture is different in that sense of just like being like quote tough and stuff. But Simon, just like listening to your story, as far as like motivations to play sports, right, is like the three needs are competence, autonomy, and relatedness, right? So you didn't have any relatedness being a new kid in a different place, right? And they didn't make you feel welcome either, like they didn't go out of their way to address, okay, listen, we know that there's not a lot of representation here, but you're still welcome here. Like that's something that a coach has to do in certain situations, is to clarify that football is for everyone, regardless of skin tone or race or anything like that. And they didn't do that, right? And then calling you stupid or making you run in the wrong plays is like an attack on your competence, right? Because, I mean, think about it. Think about like everyday hobbies, right? You're not going to go to, like hang out at a restaurant if you're by yourself and all the strangers there are making fun of you, right?
Yeah.
Like that, and it doesn't make any sense there. So why should it make sense in youth sport to do the same thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, youth sports, like it should be held to a little bit of a higher standard, because you are handling you're handling children and teenagers, like kids, people who are definitely more impressionable, developing how they see things. So it definitely it resonates a little bit more with a kid than it would with an adult, obviously.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And I feel like a lot of coaches at like the high school level, maybe it's just here in Colorado, but just from talking to you, knowing my high school experience, and also listening to Jesse talk about his high school experiences, a lot of coaches are kind of self-involved, like it's like an ego trip for high school coaches. Like, yeah, like we won like I won the conference, stuff like that. A lot of me and stuff like that. And as a coach, that's not what it's about, right? Like, like you said, you're working with very impressionable kids, and if you don't understand how they think or operate, then you're honestly not qualified for that job. And especially if, there's other incentives going on. Like I didn't get fully burnt out, right? But, I definitely had thoughts about it heading into my senior year of football. where and I'll even say this for the first 4 years is my family couldn't afford to do the summer camps, right?
Right, yeah, I get that.
And like you said earlier, granted it was your middle school, but that puts you at a disadvantage to the other kids that are there, right? So I have to work on my own time, but the coaches kind of they have to see it to believe it, right? So it's like, what have you been doing? Oh, I've been working on my own time. And they take it with a grain of salt, whether that's because you're a kid or whatever is something else. But
Yeah.
then it gets to the field and it's like, oh, okay, keeping pace or exceeding the others, and like, so I mean, the grind is like a shorter football player. And I wasn't very big in high school. I weighed 135 pounds basically throughout all of high school football. Like,
yeah, I get that.
And, at the high school level, you want to compete. A lot of people will just jump straight to size. And there is some underclassmen that they initially put ahead of me, even though I'd been doing I've been doing the same thing and was reliable for so many years for them, for 3 years to be exact. And then they resorted to me when they were dropping balls, running in the wrong plays. And it took like a lot of mistakes for them for me to go in and just play football. And so that drove me nuts. It's just like I'd stay after practice and I'd be running around the track after doing a whole 2.5 hour practice ending on conditioning. I'd stay in condition longer just because, I thought it was me. But then when it came to it, like, actually displaying skills and such like that, I realized there wasn't a huge gap, if any gap at all. And I had been outworking these guys. But whether it was, and then the coach at the end of the year was like, basically, so they gave me like some reward that was about like working hard. First off, they put the wrong name on it. So like,
what?
They spelled my name like Kody.
Oh, okay, so it was still your name, just misspelled.
Yeah, which is like, okay. Bro, I've been at the program for 4 years, so like, that felt pretty disingenuous. And then basically the coach was like, yeah, it was my idea to like put a fire underneath his butt so that, he could really help us in this, he could really help us later. I was like, no, it wasn't. You went to me because you literally had no other choice. So for you to try and spin it as your idea, like there's just a lot of ego for the head coach where I played high school at. So, and that definitely weighed on me. Is just like, what the heck, and it, for me, it was like kind of like an autonomy thing just because I didn't feel like I had a lot of control over what I was doing, like a lot of the things that they say is like, how hard you work influences your playing time. And you've heard that too. And it's like, okay, I'm working harder than everyone else. And I'm not bad, I'm not, as you said, or not to throw shade, but I'm not one of the clowns that came out here was like, yeah, football would be cool. Like, no, I've been doing this and I'm about it. So real. Like, what is happening? Like, it feels hopeless. And it's like, why would I do that? So it was kind of nice when my senior season was finally over, not going to lie, just to be out of that kind of guck.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I totally get it. Honestly, I think you and me could agree that adults are I would honestly say that they're the main ones making youth sports or sports in general toxic. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, even if there's like other kids that are saying something, where do they learn it from?
No, exactly. And I mean, it says what an adult does says more to a kid than what they say exactly. That is something that I as a PE teacher has learned a lot. And as a coach, I've learned that as something that's very true. Just because words is one thing, but actions is another. I get that. As a coach, you can't tell a kid, yeah, if you work hard, you get your time, and then not give them their time. You know what I mean? Because I mean, look, I was a shorter football player too. I wasn't as small as you though. Like I was 5'7" since my 7th grade year. But I never really had problem putting on muscle, putting on weight. So I've like always been, look, mean, at least in Texas, I was looked down upon because, I wasn't tall. I wasn't like 6'1" or 6'2" as a middle schooler, which already as is kind of freakish. And it took me moving to Colorado to realize that that's kind of abnormal. But anyways, like, not gonna lie, I was like, dang, bro, how come everyone's growing faster than me? And again, I didn't grow again. So, but anyways, it was like tough, like being a 5'7" linebacker, going up against like a 6'2" left tackle who has a way longer reach than me, who might not be stronger, but still has a bigger reach and knows how to use their size. Pause. I had to grind. And in Texas, I got rewarded for putting on weight, at least, and working with my height. Because I was always kind of a bigger guy, but I needed to turn that into muscle. And so Texas, I know Colorado doesn't do this because, Kodey, you just said that you couldn't afford some of the football camps. We had summer off-season camps, which is basically from June / late May to like August. Basically just like off-season training, whether it's football stuff, whether it's workouts, stuff like that, mostly, and it would be a good 2-hour session, I would say. And those, so you had to pay for those generally, but always made exceptions for kids who had free or reduced lunch or who they knew was going through stuff, and there was no questions asked. And I would say there are definitely hundreds of kids that was the deal, and I was one of them. And my middle school was always like, if you're from Dallas, if you're from Plano, at least, that Carpenter Middle School is considered the ghetto school. Stabbings happen there, gang violence, stuff like that. It's a normal thing, it's a normal thing. So it was not out of the ordinary for like all of the guys, like all 15 or 20 guys that can go, that didn't have to work, to be on basically a scholarship and put on weight and stuff. So at that point, basically coaches were like, all right, well then, you don't have an excuse. Now you have these off-season programs. You have access to a whole, Texas high school weight room, which is, as is probably in my opinion, like, I think you've seen the UNC weight room, right, Kodey, for athletes?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so mine was basically like, well, not mine, but in Plano, it was basically like, how should I say this? There are 3 indoor turf football fields, and then spanning that from like sideline to sideline to sideline. That was how big our weight room was, and it was basically just this huge weight warehouse. So our weight room was maybe 3 or 4 times bigger than UNC's. Honestly, probably maybe closer to CU's weight room or CSU's, if I'm being straight up. So they gave us the resources where we could work, and then when the time came, they rewarded us for it. They gave us playing time, stuff like that. You usually never found a coach that would be like, all right, well, I know you worked super hard, I know you put on 30 pounds of weight, and not play you like at least 3 or 4 drives. That's kind of a lot. And that was the same at high school as well. And I came to Colorado, and like I said, it's just a different sports culture. They're not as crazy about football. I remember specifically there was another dude playing safety who was literally my height. He was 5'7" as well. He was a junior in high school. I was a freshman. And then, I would say like I knew all of the players the same as him. And, they said, the reason that they weren't playing me as much was just because I wasn't super big, which was, all right, sure, coach, whatever. So definitely made a point of like working out, putting in the work. And I got up to at least, let's say, like athletically, like cut wise, I got to at least 220, maybe closer to 225 as a safety, as a running back. And they still didn't give me the playing time, even though I weighed darn near almost 30 pounds more than this other dude who had 3 years of high school experience just getting to the weight he was at. And it was frustrating. And honestly, all of that kind of just like, I get what you were saying. Like, it just got to the point where it was like, well, why am I doing all of this if you're not going to be true to your word? You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's just, it feels like really pointless, and it's stupid. I feel like it's kind of political, because even Jesse talked about it. There's like a coach's son thing where Jesse wouldn't get more reps at a certain position. And it's like, well,
I don't think, first off, correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, but if the coach's son is playing in Texas, they're probably the best player on the team because they've been crazy for a while.
Actually, honestly, I've seen more coaches in Texas bench their son and make their son a second or third string because they're just not as good. If I'm being honest, like they're good, but they're not, like, for our team standards, starter good or star good. So it was common in Texas to see, at least in my opinion, to see, dads that were tougher on their kids and wouldn't give them a spot just because, well, for a lot of reasons. Just honestly, it boils down to talent. They just weren't more talented,
See, and I don't even think that, at least in my experience in sport, that we have that kind of integrity amongst coaches in youth sport in Colorado.
Oof. Yeah. I mean, I've seen it too, because ironically, while I was at Doherty, I also did training sessions with the middle schoolers, the 8th graders who are coming up, just because I was close friends with their family members, And I specifically remember this one kid happened, they weren't even related, but the head coach of the high school was the godfather of this kid, and he gave him the starting spot on varsity as a running back week 1. They had a guy, which was here. You're gonna cringe at this. They had a guy. We called him Quan, who had interest and looks from Pac-12 schools, SEC schools. Before he got benched for that bogus reason, he was getting looks from Oregon. He was getting looks from Bama, from LSU. And what's crazy is that, he probably wasn't going to get a full-time scholarship, but he would have gotten a partial or, a preferred walk-on, which is still really good for those schools, It was his senior year, and the guy decided to play his freshman godson over him after one, minor ankle injury. And basically, my boy Quan played one game, and then he got that ankle injury. And after that, they were already sharing carries, so it was what it was. But after that, basically, that kid took over, and he did not see the field again, and all his college offers and interest went away. And he ended up not going to college. He didn't even end up going to community college. And I'm not gonna lie, dude definitely suffered from a little bit of depression from just being so lost. And I don't care about exposing them. It was something that happened, and if you ask anybody on the team, it happened. And that's just one example of another example of adults, creating toxic sports environments.
So I guess, what do you think has to be done to try and prevent toxic environments or to try and reduce burnout in youth sport?
So there's a couple of different directions this could take. If you're a parent of an athlete, it's generally suggested that you get your kid into more than one sport. Because if they're doing football year round, that sucks. Nobody wants to do that. Even if they're doing 2 sports year round, especially if they're a kid that has tougher time with paying attention to things for super long periods of time, I would say even do 3 sports. So basketball, football, track. There you go. And that way you're not working on something for too long. You're still kind of working on those skills. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a ton of benefits, physically, emotionally, and psychologically to being a multi-sport athlete in youth sport.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just different cultures that you're exposed to, different teammates you're exposed to, and there's so much more that you could learn because it's not the same old thing that you're doing. It's different. And, having a change of perspective, sometimes a change of scenery could do wonders for an athlete's mental health. And, when their main sport comes around, maybe they're a little bit more focused because it's all right, I wasn't exposed to this sport year round. I only have this sport for 2 or 3 months and that's it. So let's go to work and let's go all in, So that's just one way, in my opinion. Well, what about you? Well, is there another way, in your opinion, that toxic environments, burnouts can be prevented?
Well, I think it comes down to, especially at the high school level, is holding coaches accountable and making sure that, they belong where they are, right? Like there's no national like coaching certification thing that is like required to be a coach. Like in other countries, especially over in Europe, you have to have like a certificate that you took like a course on coaching or something like that to even apply as a coach, right? And we flat out don't have that here in the United States.
No, for sure. I mean, honestly, any parent could become a coach. That's the problem, because, and should I say this? You have somebody who doesn't have a ton of experience as a coach. First off, you can't blame them for not having that experience if it wasn't something that they're originally into. They gotta put in the work to make up for that, to do the right thing, to be disciplined, not just as a parent, but as a coach, to have the guts to, hey, kiddo, like to your own kid, be like, hey, kiddo, like, I'm sorry, but homie over here has just been working harder than you, or they just have this edge. And so we'll get you in, but for the good of the team, this is what we got to do. And, you got to think about, as a coach, you got to think about what's best for the team and what's best for your players, because you wouldn't have a job without either of those. So,
yeah. And I think that another problem that we have is just like, I mean, a lot of coaching, especially at the youth sport level, is volunteer. Like,
yes,
there's not like a financial incentive to put in. I mean, say you have practice 5 days a week for two hours, just lowballing it, not even including travel time. And then game day, that's like 5 or 6 hours of your day. So you're putting in like 16 hours of work a week, not even including travel. So if you include travel afterwards, like 20 hours a week, and you're not getting paid for it, and then you have to pay out of pocket to learn or to get a certification in coaching. There's just, there's not a lot of money there. And so that's why parents end up coaching. And that's why inexperienced people step into roles that, quite frankly, they don't have a lot of business in being in. It's just because there's not the resources to get someone who is qualified to do it.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. Like, I get that. And I mean, like, I definitely get that. I understand that each coach can't be perfect, and they sometimes don't have the time to do the research and whatnot. That's definitely a real problem, especially, in a country where it's highly populated, obviously. So that means naturally you have a ton of different teams, leagues, sports, athletes, and whatnot. So it's hard. If you're not at a place that values that sport specifically, to find quality coaches. But like I said, you could still do the research. You could do what you can do to get better as a coach, honestly. And I mean, look, you don't just hit a point where you're like, all right, well, I need to stop growing. Like, I can't get any better. No, like, this is just like literally anything else in life. Like, it's something that you got to continue to work at. You got to continue to learn. And this is kind of a little transition, but another way that you could like prevent burnout in toxic environments is by having a good learning environment and team culture that is very accepting of, people who just want to learn the sport and just want to get better and just want to progress, because a winning centric team is almost never going to be super successful all the time, because there's just so much pressure with that. And, with winning in games and stuff, like, that's not exactly something you could handle, but you could always handle yourself. You could always handle your own learning. And to a degree, you could handle other people's learning as well. So establishing that kind of culture of learning, a culture of progression, an emphasis on that is important, in my opinion, and could definitely take out a lot of pressures that result into burnouts.
I completely agree, and that's actually one of the pillars of my coaching philosophy. And the biggest part of my coaching philosophy is, I want to help athletes be better people, right? Because there's a lot of lessons that you can learn through sport that you can apply to real life. That's a huge appeal for getting your kids into sport at young ages, is that it's supposed to help them develop and, like you said, progress. And It's not like if they find ways to improve and work hard on the sports field, there's also similar ways that they can work hard or improve off the field too. So there's just a lot of opportunities with that. And I completely agree that the focus has a lot to do with it, because you really can't control winning all the time. Like that, as far as like you could try your best and still lose, as a team. Like it's completely possible, right? Sometimes the other team is just flat out better. And so if you put an emphasis on winning, then that also creates like you said, like a toxic environment and an environment that's conducive to burnout.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like, that's something that a lot of coaches, I feel like, don't really talk about a lot, honestly. Like, they don't talk about how you could work super, like, in anything in life, you could still work super hard and put everything you got in it, and you will still fail, because that's life. Like, oh my gosh. Have you ever seen the show Friday Night Lights, Kodey?
No.
Oof. Okay. I'm gonna spoil it slightly. It's a great show. Honestly, it's a great show that everyone should check out. But anyways, there's this little line that one of the coaches says during like a state championship game about how how every man's gonna be in a battle and they're gonna try their hardest and they're gonna do everything they can and they're still gonna lose. They can't do anything about it. But what makes them a person of success is staying true to yourself throughout all of that. And, it's very easy as a coach and as an athlete to definitely lose yourself and do things very out of character that you would not be proud of if you were in any other situation, honestly. So that is something, like, for me, that's part of my coaching philosophy, like helping kids accept, like, look, it's okay to fail, because honestly, you could fail doing anything. You could fail working as hard as you can. You could fail not working as hard as you can. And like sometimes even with success, sometimes, well, no, not actually. Hold up, let me backtrack. With success, like the only way that I guess you could get it is by working hard and by continuously improving. You can't just randomly jump into success, at least consistently, unless you're privileged. That's a whole nother thing though, which we already talked about. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, not me, but y'all did.
Yeah, well, you know how it is. Yeah, no, for sure. Is there another way that burnouts could be prevented? I feel like we went over a lot of them. I mean, just honestly, taking away pressures.
Honestly, like taking away pressures and then just like trying to be a good person to the kids. Like, like just be a good person, If you I'm not going to say if you wouldn't do it to your kids, don't do it to other people's kids, because some people do berate and yell at their kids like that. But like, like yes, they're kids, and it's a bit harder to get their attention. But you got to show some respect, just as like from a human being perspective.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it just comes back to the whole idea that kids, they'll copy what you do, like your actions, rather than do what you say. Like actions are louder than words.
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
It's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do kind of thing, especially because we talked about middle school and high school, but youth sports, especially at the elementary school level, like kind of like Friday Night Tykes, there's definitely some stuff that isn't developmentally appropriate happening on there. And, like, bro, I'm not even going to lie. Like, maybe it's just like a difference of culture, so like maybe if I was raised in Texas, it'd be a bit different. But like, bro, if I was going through that when I was in like second grade, I probably would have just stopped playing football. Like,
that's fair.
I like a problem is like holding kids to like the same expectations as adults is a huge problem in youth sport, and that's from parents too. Like, kids are going to make more mistakes than professional athletes. That's a fact.
Yeah, Oh, absolutely. And going to that Friday Night Text comment, like, yeah, I mean, I totally get it. I think another thing that's a really important to keep in mind though is that your kid could burn out from playing a sport because it's too easy or it's something that's just not challenging enough for them. It's definitely possible because it's like, what am I doing here? Like I'm wasting my time. If I could just do whatever I want and there's no actual like feeling of accomplishment, you know, and that's a slippery slope because as an adult, sometimes you can't tell your kids' feeling when it comes to that. But I mean, that's kind of where like leagues like in Friday Night Type would come in. The board members say this, at least Kenny Long said this at least. The league was built so that it could challenge kids, get them in a competitive environment that, pushes them to be better and pushes them to be great and whatnot. And so some kids sometimes just need that. They need a challenge because it gets boring dominating your same local YMCA team. Like it gets to the point where you ask yourself, or as an athlete, you ask yourself, well, this sucks. Like what now? Like, well, is this all there is to the sport? Like, am I never going to get a real challenge? Then when they do get a real challenge, they could burn out as well because they were not, they're babied basically their whole life. So I'm just throwing out, that perspective as well.
Yeah, and there's definitely room for like elite competition, I think. And I'm pretty sure you said that'll be like another conversation is stuff like IMG Academy and stuff like that. And, there's room for that. But at the same time, it's still okay to be a good person in those environments,
Oh yeah, you should still be a good person. No, for sure. But yeah, it's easy. Well, oh no, hold on. It's not easy to be a good person. It's not like, it's something that you gotta pay a ton of money for and whatnot. You just do it. It comes down to discipline.
This just in from Simon Villanos, 6/23/2020. It's free to be a good person. You might need to tell someone in your family or someone that you know that. But wise words from Simon. It's free to be a good person.
Yes. Well, it is, But what's crazy is that people still want to do whatever they want and then be selfish and be egomaniacs and not like all of that toxic stuff that makes up burnout, toxic sports environments, which is kind of insane because I feel like by now people would know, but it is what it is. Like not to get it twisted, like there's a difference between being a good there's a difference between being a good person who's strict and being a jerk who wants to act, because there are definitely kids out there that need a little bit of attitude, a little bit of some pushing for them to get to get back on track and be the best person they could be. They're honestly just kids that respond to that tough love, But when you do that, you got to make sure that first off, your heart's right, your personality's right, and you're doing it for the right reasons. Like you should never do something because that it'll intentionally like hurt a kid and that will motivate them.
Yeah, and that like false narrative is a huge part of burnout too. Like we've talked about, but.
No, for sure. And honestly, being like somebody who gives tough love, but is still like, what's the word? Like they're coaching and teaching developmentally appropriately. That's hard to do. Because if you're one of those types of people, you're basically just walking a real thin line, and chances are, if you're not careful, most of the time, you're probably going to be on the wrong side of that line. On the wrong side of history and stuff like that, and I cross the line and do some damage to a kid's psyche or emotional health. And that's never a good thing. I was honestly lucky to have a coach in at least my 8th grade year in middle school. Shout out to Coach Sterling over for the Cowboys. He's still over there after all these years, but still getting dubs as always. Shout out to him. He was someone who was tough, and I'll always believe this. He was tough on us he was tough on us because he knew what kind of kids we were. He knew the backgrounds, the the culture that we all represented. A lot of us were first generation Americans. Some of our parents, I'm just gonna say that, not my parents, but some of the parents on my squad, they immigrated illegally, and their kids ended up being DACA kids years later, and all these other stuff happened. And he coached us in a way that would not only make us mentally tough for the football field, which is being mentally tough for a game can honestly be really easy to do, but being mentally tough in life, being the type of person that could bounce back, that could not bend not break type of people, the type of person that other people rely on to be that rock and to be a center of stability. So I can honestly say, like, from that middle school squad, not all of us made the right decisions, but there's no doubt that no matter what, we're still, like, I would say, like, tough people who could take the tougher things of life, make the best out of it, even if it's not perfect sometimes. And in life, nothing's gonna be perfect. Barely anything's gonna be perfect. So I just went on a whole rant. The inner coach in me came out a little bit, but I felt like it needed to be said.
Hey, it's important for the perspective. So
yeah, for sure. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we close this up?
I don't think so. We kind of started with like the education part, and then the story part. It's just being aware, and just whoever's listening to this, tell your friends. And burnout also exists for like other things too. Like we talk sports here, but like if you have a child that's into music and you start like berating them into practicing like 8 hours a day, like they'll probably stop enjoying it. Like, so just carry that same be a good person attitude towards anything. And it's really important. This whole youth sports series, I'm really proud of Simon for coming up with it and bringing it to attention, because this is the future that we're talking about, and I think sports help us become better people. And learning about these topics are going to help not only the kids' future and young athletes' future, but just the future of the world in general. So
appreciate that, bud. Appreciate that. Yeah, I guess the only thing else I could add is that if you're a parent or a guardian who's super into sports, it's okay if your kid wants to do something else. I feel like I need to say that one more time. It's okay if your kid wants to do something else, and sports is more of something where they just stay in shape. Because like you said, it could be any topic where they could burn out on. But having a variety of things, especially for kids to do, just having more learning experiences is important. You'd rather have Renaissance men, or not just men. You'd rather have Renaissance people, like people who could do it all, than people who could specialize in one thing that in a snap go away and won't matter. Like you got to be someone who's well-rounded. So that's just something I got put out there, because I know my middle school coach, he had like maybe 10 or 15 of us who were part of band, choir, orchestra. I was one of those kids. And whenever we had like after school practices or like individual like stuff that we had to work on with our music teachers, he would literally let us we would suit up for practice. And once that final bell rings, signaling the end of school and whatnot, we were still practicing, he would let us go back into the school, do what we need to do for an hour, and then come back to practice. No questions asked. As long as we're doing great, or as long as we're happy and we're doing our thing, like that's fine. No questions asked. He will come to the competitions and will support us. And sometimes that's all a kid needs, just to support them, not just in sports but in all things in life. So just keep that in mind. I'm saying that as a teacher as well.
Good advice, because I didn't have a personality outside of sports till like 7th grade. like no kidding, like bro, I'd be like reading like stat books in like 2nd grade from the school library, like, oh, this is the all-time leader in touchdown passes and stuff like that. So yeah, let your kids grow and develop, so they're not a one-trick pony.
Yeah. And that's okay too. Like if they want to be all about that stuff, like it's cool, but it's never a bad thing to push them to try other things. Music, art, socializing. Yeah. And I won't go too deep into that. You know what I mean. But anyways, that is the end of this episode of our youth sports mini series, a dive into youth sports. So look out for future episodes. We're gonna have many more perspectives on, especially female perspectives, to talk about their experiences in youth sports. And then we're going to touch on more topics concerning youth sports as well. So I am one of your co-hosts, Simon Villanos.
And I am a humbled guest on this mini-series, Kodey Stoffer.
And make sure you check out our normal episodes as well. Show us some love on social media. Follow us. Do all that stuff. Find us at The Cycle 365 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. In addition to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And peace.